Welcome to Cookmas Carlson Day 70. I'm not sure. But it's almost the end of Cookmas Carlson.
At least before the summer.
I know.
Almost the last day of school. Alright, today what we're going to do is show you how to make what is traditionally called sticky buns. So they're like a cinnamon roll, but they've got an ooey gooey topping that bakes kind of in the bottom of a pan. So when you flip them out, the ooey gooey topping kind of just drips down through your cinnamon roll. So it's not a traditional cinnamon roll, but it has a lot of the similar taste. I've measured out 3/4 of a cup of water. We're going to add about 1/2 cup of milk to this. We're going to put this in the microwave just for about 40 seconds. Of yeast for this recipe. 3 tablespoons of butter for this part of the dough. You'll need a lot of butter throughout this recipe, but to start with, we need 3 tablespoons. 3 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, and 3 1/4 cups of flour. Those ingredients together is what is going to make our dough. So while your milk and water have warmed up, we are going to add in 2 teaspoons of yeast. So I'm going to just dump this right into my mixer because we'll use our hand mixer for this. If you don't have a stand mixer, then you can do this by hand. It will take a little bit more kneading, but it works by hand as well. Okay, so just stir in your yeast till it's slightly dissolved. Then we're going to add in some sugar, 3 tablespoons of sugar. One. The sugar is going to help activate the yeast a little bit more too. Then you're going to add in 3 tablespoons of butter. We'll also add in our salt. 1 teaspoon of salt. Right. You want to make sure your butter doesn't get too hot either if you put it in the microwave because that could potentially kill your yeast. So now we're going to add in our flour 1 cup at a time. I'm going to start by just using my spoon to mix that in because it's pretty liquidy right now. And if you put the kneading hook on right away, then it's not going to mix very well. So there's 1 cup. Now if you wanted to make traditional cinnamon rolls, you could look back at our homemade white bread recipe. And when you get that to the dough stage, after your dough has had the chance to rise, you could put this butter and cinnamon and sugar mixture on the inside of any bread dough recipe, really, and then bake that up like cinnamon rolls. That would be more of a traditional cinnamon roll. These are the sticky buns, so you'll be able to see the difference at the end of this video. Okay, so we've got 3 cups in here. I'm going to add another about 1/4 cup just to form a dough. This is going to be a slightly sticky dough, so make sure you don't add too much flour because you think maybe it's not doughy enough. It'll be okay if it's a really soft dough. Don't add too much flour. Okay, so about 3 1/4 cups, that's all you need. After 5 minutes of kneading with our hook attachment right here, this one, your dough will look like this. Again, it is slightly sticky. That's okay, you don't need to add extra flour for that. What we're going to do is push our dough to one side and then grease all sides of the pan, and then let this sit with the towel over the bowl in a warm environment for about 45 minutes to an hour or until this doubles.
Time to make the sticky bun part.
Yeah, the cinnamon and sugar and the sticky bun part. So you're going to need a couple of different things going here. We've still got our bread kind of resting in our oven. It's warm in there. It is still rising. When we finish this, we'll pull it out. It's been about 45 minutes that it's been in the oven. Okay, so on your stove top, you'll need a saucepan. We're going to put in 1/4 cup of butter. So that's 1/2 stick. Take just a little bit of this off. And you put that right into your saucepan. So 1/4 cup of butter or 1/2 stick. 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and that will be packed. Measuring cup in here. Packed brown sugar. And then we're going to put in 1/4 cup of our light corn syrup. Alright, so that's pretty good. I'm going to the end of my brown sugar here. Okay, and 1/4 cup. This will be very sticky and thick, so you might need a spatula or a spoon to get all of this out of your measuring cup. I'm just going to use this spatula to mix all of these ingredients together as they heat on the stove. So that's what you're going to do. Turn your stovetop on to medium. And all we're going to do is just cook this down until the sugar is kind of dissolved into the corn syrup and the butter. All right, so meanwhile, in a separate bowl, we're going to put 2 tablespoons of regular sugar and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon together. This is what's going to go on the inside of our dough. So 2 tablespoons of sugar and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. So we'll just mix this together and then set that aside. We'll also need another 1/4 cup of butter to go on top of our dough before we put the cinnamon and sugar on. So that's what I've got here. This butter should be soft, not melted. Otherwise your butter will seep all out of your dough, but it should be very soft and easy to spread. Okay, so we'll set that aside and continue to stir our sugar, corn syrup, and butter mixture. You'll also want to get out a 9 by 13 inch pan. I have this glass one here. Just going to spray this with cooking spray all over. And we'll set that aside. It doesn't take too long for this to melt down, a couple of minutes. Okay, so after everything has melted, it's taken probably 3 or 4 minutes or so. You'll see that our sugar is dissolved pretty well. It doesn't necessarily have to boil, but it's going to be really close to boiling here. But you don't want to cook it for too long because it'll get hard. So when it's really close to boiling and it looks like your sugar's dissolved, we're going to pour that right into our 9 by 13 inch pan. And use your spatula to just spread it out so that it covers the entire pan. And then we're just going to set this aside. Okay, so our dough has had a chance to rise. It's definitely doubled in size. You're going to punch that down just with your fist. Just punch it down right in the middle, just one time. Take a little bit of flour, very lightly flour your surface. This is just to prevent sticking when you roll it out. But again, you don't want this to be too floury because your cinnamon rolls will taste like flour instead of the dough. All right, so we're just going to pull this out onto our surface. And you can get some of the flour on both sides. That's usually best because this way your rolling pin won't stick to your dough either. What you want to do is roll this out into as much of a rectangle as you can. Okay, so you're going to roll it both ways, long, horizontally, and vertically. So you get it out into a nice size rectangle. I never measure this, but you can see it's just as close to a rectangle as possible. It does not have to be perfect at all. And we're going to say that that's good enough. All right, and just make sure it's not sticking to your countertop. Pull out your edges a little bit. All right, and then you take your very softened butter. This is about 1/4 cup of butter. And then we're going to, I just use my hands. If you don't want to get your hands buttery, then use a spoon. But this is definitely the easiest way. Just going to spread this all across the dough. So across the whole surface area, making sure that there's butter everywhere. Now you want to make sure that your butter's not melted because this will be an incredibly messy process if your butter's running all over the place. All right, so now's the fun part. Now we're going to put our cinnamon and sugar mixture on top of our cinnamon rolls. So just spread this all around.
Wouldn't be a cinnamon roll without the cinnamon.
What? Oh, right, it wouldn't be a cinnamon roll without the cinnamon. You're right. Now again, if you don't want to do this sticky bun part of this recipe, you could just use regular dough here and bake these like traditional cinnamon rolls. Just grease your pan and just put it in the pan normally. Okay, so our white bread recipe would work perfectly for this too, if you don't want to go to the trouble to do sticky buns. All right, so we're just spreading this around our dough. Now we're going to roll it up. So you'll start from a long end, and you want to roll this pretty tightly so you don't get a lot of air pockets in here. But I just kind of work my way down the cinnamon roll, just twirling it creating a long roll. Okay, so this is what's making that cinnamon mixture go throughout all of your dough. Okay, so you just roll it all the way up. You don't have to seal these ends off, that's okay. When you get to the very bottom, what I like to do, so nothing falls out, is just pull the top part over to help seal that in. So we'll just pull that over. See, this is why you don't want to have melted butter. This would be a huge mess if your butter were melted. Okay, so now I'm going to use a serrated knife. I cut it in half first, about half, does not have to be perfect. And then we're going to cut each side into 6 pieces. So what I do is I kind of figure out where the halfway point is. Again, I make little marks on here just so that I know my cinnamon roll sizes are going to be about the same before I make the actual cuts. Otherwise, you've got a lot of misshapen cinnamon rolls. 3, 4, 5. Know that the ones on the end are going to be a little bit smaller, so you can make those ones a little bit bigger. All right, and then you just slice them with your serrated knife. This is what it's going to look like, cut up. And we place this right on top of our sticky bun creation here. So you'll have 3 cinnamon rolls by 4. So 12 rolls in a pan. We just continue to do that until all of our cinnamon rolls are placed. Now, because you've got some of these that are a little bit smaller, for my placement of my cinnamon rolls, I do kind of vary the bigger ones with the smaller ones so that they're kind of just coming together so you don't have things cooking kind of unevenly in here. So some of my smaller ones I'll put between the bigger ones so that they expand a little bit more, like the smaller one I'll put in the middle of 2 big middle pieces. You can press them down to make sure that they sit up straight. So after your cinnamon rolls are all placed in the pan, we're going to cover this again with that towel and let this sit in the warm spot for about 30 minutes before we bake. After about 30 or 40 minutes, the cinnamon rolls are ready to go into a preheated 375 degree oven. And these are going to bake for about 20 minutes. Baking, our cinnamon rolls look like they're ready to come out of the oven. You'll notice that they're starting to brown up on top and on the sides. That's what you're looking for. You don't want them to be too mushy on the inside of the roll part. So then what we do is take a big sheet cake pan and then just put it on top of your glass dish. And then we're just going to flip that over. And sometimes it helps if you use a fork or something like that. Even a butter knife, just to wedge that underneath the pan so you don't burn yourself. To lift that off, let's set that aside. All right, so bring this a little closer. This is what your cinnamon rolls will look like inverted. So notice that that sticky stuff has now baked into the top of your cinnamon roll. Our last step now is to make a little glaze, because this probably isn't sweet enough. To need a half of a cup of powdered sugar. So just get any bowl, about a half of a cup of powdered sugar, about a quarter of a teaspoon or so of vanilla, just a little bit. We're not making a lot of glaze for this, just a little bit. About a quarter of a teaspoon's plenty. And about a tablespoon of milk. Now again, this is just a simple glaze. If you want it to be thinner, you just add a little more milk. If you want it to be thicker, add a little more powdered sugar. That's all there is to making glaze. All right, so while these are warm, I'm going to drizzle this glaze over the top of our cinnamon rolls. And of course, these are best warm. You will want them to sit for about 10 minutes or so though, because they're pretty hot right now. And the last step is just to drizzle this over the top. Let it sit for a little bit and then enjoy your sticky buns.